I'm gonna come up here.
I want to make sure.
I'll be kind of here.
Do you see it?
Yep. Sure, that's totally perfect. That's perfect. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no. I think it did.
I did that.
Oh, you did that. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. I did. That's okay.
Good evening. We're so glad that you're here tonight and able to join us again for this series on the mental health. Tonight we have Amanda Price, Dr. Amanda Price, and she's going to be speaking to us on anxiety and stress. And one of her most claims to fame is that she attended the University of Tennessee and got her master's and PhD there. But she also went to Wake Forest and the University of Georgia. She has some other things on here, so you can find her papers in the back that will be presented tonight, as well as those that were presented last night with Andrew. They're back there too for you. Please remember to sign in. You can have a little snack. And these sheets will be taken up to the outside the office. So anyone that's online or looks at it tonight by Facebook Live, you can get it from up there too. So we welcome you, Amanda, one of our own, to share with us tonight. I'm going to get a microphone out if we need to also pass it around and we don't hear people. So just know I'll have it, I'll place it on the table. And if you want to say something that might be at length, you can take the microphone and we might be able to hear it more even on live. All right, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like I'm here all the time, but at the same time, in a different capacity, it's kind of nice to see each of you. So I presented or prepared slides. They have a lot of information on there because I didn't know who might pick them up and who might not be here to hear my explanation. So typically when I do presentations, I'm not that wordy on slides. Typically I have little maybe bullets and that kind of thing. But so I don't mean to bore you by reading some of the slides. I'm also going to talk off the cuff as well and kind of combine both of my thoughts and also the data that's there. So the first slide here, obviously we started with Andrew last week, our Fateful Conversations, Embracing Mental Health and Wellbeing. I'm going to talk about anxiety and stress. It'll go a little bit deeper than just those two words, but we're going to talk a little about that today. This is going to be awkward. I'm going to move these around. Okay, so this slide is just a little bit about me. You don't have to learn a lot of that. But my point is, I am a licensed counseling psychologist here in North Carolina. I have been licensed since 2002. I've worked in a variety of different settings, both in college counseling centers, at Duke in their occupational health and well-being. I've had a private practice for many years, mainly working with adults, some adolescents as well, and families and couples. And now I am actually writing as a subject matter expert on behavioral health, and I'm writing continuing education for licensed mental health care providers. So I'm getting to dig into some of the research. So some of this is a little bit researchy, but I just felt like it would be helpful for you to know more about it. So this is a little bit about me. I am a member of Trinity since 2007. I have two daughters who have grown up in the church here. One is actually a freshman at the University of Tennessee, very orange. And also I have a freshman at Leesville High School, and she's over with the youth tonight. Okay, so digging into this, what I thought would be helpful is to talk a little bit about anxiety and stress from a couple of different perspectives. One is that the good news is that we have made these terms pretty well known in today's culture, which is fantastic. You've heard people say, oh, I'm so anxious about this, or I'm totally stressed out, or you know, I had some, you know, traumatic experience. So people are using the language, which is fantastic. And I want to make sure that you know a little bit of the differences. So I've written here, stress is typically caused by an external trigger. The trigger can be short-term, such as a work deadline or a fight with a loved one, or it can be long-term, such as being out of work or having discrimination or chronic illness. People under stress experience mental and physical symptoms such as irritability, anger, fatigue, muscle pain, some digestive issues, physical, and difficulty sleeping. So stress is that thing that typically we can attribute to a stressor, something that is typically going on. Anxiety, on the other hand, is defined by persistent excessive worries that don't really go away, even if there's nothing really provoking that worry, no external stressor. It leads to nearly identical symptoms, which is why people kind of use these interchangeably, right? Like stress, insomnia, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, muscle tension. You know, we always talk about sort of the stress maybe that people hold in their necks and what have you, and irritability. So just trying to give you some groundwork on those differences. Also in stress, we have acute stress, which is something that occurs for a short-term stressor, like a car accident or maybe an argument with your spouse. Now that argument keeps going on and on, that might be chronic, but a one-time event is an acute stress event. It can be distressing, but it generally passes quickly, and it usually responds well to coping techniques. You've heard people say, you know, breathing techniques, counting to 10, those kinds of acute stress typically work well with those kinds of maybe relaxation. But then we have chronic stress, and those are stressors that don't really let up. And they're the roots of, it says the roots of chronic stress can vary widely from situations that people can control or avoid, like maybe a toxic, difficult friendship, or difficulties that are hard to escape, like poverty or racism or other kinds of discrimination. And because people respond differently to stressful circumstances, a situation that one person might find tolerable can become a source of chronic stress for another. So you'll see this a lot in our literature in psychology when we talk about resiliency. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that today, but just know that that is an area that you can explore to learn more about resiliency to chronic stress. We can talk a little about those pieces, but because people respond differently, maybe because of their history, maybe because of their just makeup as a personality, their different stressors can have short-term or long-term effects for different people. And you probably know this in what you've seen for yourself. Chronic stress can damage mental and physical health, right? Anything that we do long-term. If you have a torn ligament, right, on your leg, and you keep walking on it, you likely will do more damage. So the longer we have a stressful event or stressful something going on in our life, the more likely we are going to have some damage to maybe our physical and or mental health. Being chronically stressed can leave you feeling fatigued. We've talked about this already. Stop your ability to concentrate, cause maybe headaches, go back to digestive issues. Quick little tidbit, and that is that the medications a lot of people take for mental health issues like antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication is working on a chemical in our body called serotonin. The most serotonin in your body is actually held in your gut, which is why most people will have gut reactions to starting those medications, and also a reason why we will have upset stomachs when we are stressed or anxious. So just a little tidbit. People prone to irritable bowel can have symptoms because of just psychological stress, no eating a bad, meal or something. Acute stress can heighten certain immune systems. So here's the thing: when we have certain stressors in life and we learn how to cope with them. I have a college student, so she gets a bad test on a grade, and that's an acute stressor. She's like, oh no, right? We can learn from that, and we can grow from that, and we can actually learn to do things better in the same way that it also might help an immune response. If our body is stressed initially, but it learns how to cope with it, it actually can help our immune system. But chronic stress is very different. It is very bad for our immune system. Chronic stress can affect cardiac health. Multiple studies have linked chronic stress and the development of coronary artery disease. So that is another reason why people are very cautious about, making sure that you assess how you're coping with chronic stressors. So we thought, or at least I thought, this pandemic was going to be an acute stressor. 2 years is not, 3 years is not acute by anyone's definition. So we've moved into this notion of all of this being a very chronic stressful event. So different people are going to cope with that differently. And while we started out trying to cope with something that we thought was going to be acute, you have to recognize that when we cope with acute stressors, those coping skills are different than how we cope with chronic stressors. So oftentimes people will say, well, I'm doing my deep breathing. Well, you've been doing that for 2 years? Like, that's not gonna work anymore, So part of what we have to recognize is that we gotta dig deeper and have some different types of ways to cope. Now, I'm going to point out anxiety disorders. I'm not going to get on my soapbox on this, but it is something that is near and dear to my heart. I work with this pretty much all the time in my private practice, is anxiety disorders. So the issue here is anxiety is a normal reaction to, and it can be beneficial. So go back to my college student, right? She gets a bad grade and she's like, oh my gosh, she's going to be super anxious for the next test. Hopefully she's anxious enough to prepare. Right? Hopefully, it gives her some energy to do something differently to make things better for herself. Okay? So we can have some low-level anxiety and it actually be helpful to us. But it is where it becomes excessive worry that becomes more diagnosable. And you heard Andrew talk last week about the notion between a mental health concern and an issue versus mental illness. So for the sake of this presentation too, mental illness and mental disorders are going to be the things that are diagnosable. They're in that big, what we call the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is where we have diagnoses. I'm really today here to talk, while acknowledging the mental health disorders, also acknowledging that we have mental health concerns and how to help you with some of those. So anxiety disorders are not simple diagnoses. There's not a blood test for it, and they can take many forms, and they can accompany medical conditions. So here's the other thing: if you are having a cardiac event and your heart is racing, that is also giving you feedback that maybe I'm also anxious, because a racing heart beat is also a symptom of anxiety itself. So important to just recognize that these things can affect each other. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental disorder, and they affect nearly 30% of adults at some point in their lives. So this is where I get a little bit biology, so bear with me for a minute. My point in giving you this slide is not to get into the weeds about biology, but it is to explain to you, how many of you have had a broken bone? Broken leg, arm, finger, anything? Okay. How many of you have had like knee surgery, ankle surgery, shoulder surgery? Okay. How many of you who raised your hand know when it's going to rain? Yeah, you see? Okay, but can you move those joints? Can you move those things that you broke or whatever? Are they maybe not 100%, but you can generally, most of the time, they're functional. Okay, so I like to use that analogy because just like my daughter had knee surgery, when the big rain came through over Christmas break, she was like, "Yeah, my knee is hurting." I'm like, "Well, you're gonna know about the rain every day, or every time it rains from now on." And she's only 18. But I say that to say you're gonna have acknowledgement of anxiety and stress that has happened in your life, but we can and expect to recover from these situations that happen. That is key. Is the expectation for me as a provider is that recovery not only is possible, but is expected. So that is where my hope comes from. That is where my expectation lies when I talk about these things. So amygdala, this really cool little part in the brain, it is the emotional center of your brain. It can be affected by exposure to chronic stress and trauma. And by affected, I mean like it can change in size, it can change in shape. It's a wackadoodle that can happen, but anyway. Also the hippocampus, that is kind of the memory area of the brain. And really interesting that they've done some studies with people with PTSD, and that when they're exposed to something that reminds them of the trauma, we hear, like veterans who hear a really loud sound and it puts them back to a combat situation. That is why, because the hippocampus has actually been altered in some way. Sometimes it's the biochemistry that's going through it, sometimes it's the actual structure of it. So just like our ankle or our shoulder that feels the effects of having maybe an operation or a break, our brain has the same experience. Same thing with the prefrontal cortex. Now, you hear about that part of the brain as executive functioning. So it is very important to us, but it can be seen to have effects from people who have PTSD. It can account for irrational fears that trauma victims might have trouble overcoming, that they can't quite get it, that they don't have to be fearful in a certain situation because that prefrontal cortex has been affected. So this is just my way of letting you know that it is beyond just the fact that someone has an issue, has an experience that upset them. It actually can be as deep as some anatomy changes. Okay, so there's trauma is specifically defined as actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Now that is for a diagnosis. Now those of us who may have been in a tragic or a difficult car accident might feel the effects of that trauma, but we might be able to move through it. When we define trauma in this way, we're really talking about stressful events that are not involving immediate, that are involving immediate or actual or threatened sense of death or serious injury. So traumatic stress can be associated with lasting changes in the brain, as I mentioned, and trauma can cause your brain to remain in a state of hypervigilance. It can suppress your memory, impulse control, trapping you in a constant state of emotional reactivity. And it also can change brain chemistry with cortisol. So you may have heard of cortisol as the stress hormone. We get that broken down usually when we exercise and such, but at the level of trauma, cortisol is really high. And it can have effects on the brain. Okay, I've talked a lot, so you guys get to talk. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is recognizing signs of struggle. Now, you can cheat and look at the next slide, but I would love to hear things that are not on the next slide. Okay, so it says, what I want you to think about. Now, we have tables, so if you guys will spend a few minutes at your table, this is not always comfortable to talk about out loud, but I'm going to ask for volunteers to volunteer information that you may have talked about at the table, if you want to. You don't have to. But if you will, and those of you at single tables, if you'll maybe join up or something, I want you to just think about these questions. So how do you know that you're feeling stressed or anxious? What signs or symptoms can you name? That's for you personally. Secondly, what signs do you see in family or friends that indicate that they're anxious or stressed? And that may be a diagnosable anxiety that you've seen in your loved one, or it might just be a stressor that you might have going on in your life right now. And then last, and those two things might actually be the same. What you might experience might also be something you see in others. And then thirdly, what do you do to help alleviate those symptoms for yourself? I'm just trying to get an idea of like, where do you start kind of thing, okay? All right, this is where I'm gonna say talk amongst yourselves. You get about 3.5 minutes. It's not very long. Just talk about it. This isn't meant to be diving deep. Just talk about it. Okay. All right. Talk amongst yourselves because I'm going to come around. I'm going to come mask on. I'll be back. Good, about 1 minute. Okay, let's bring it back up here for just a minute. I promise I'll let you talk some more. This is a very interesting topic. Me especially. Okay. So let's tackle that first question. How do you know that you're feeling stressed and anxious, and what symptoms do you typically have? Anybody want to share from your table?
We had people sharing about feeling withdrawal, and also people feeling overwhelmed by like sound or just sensory things.
Yes, overwhelming by sounds and sensory. Oh, yeah, when I'm super anxious, that is,
Yep.
you'll know I am super anxious because the radio does not turn on in my car. It's quiet. Yeah, it's a really good. Those are good examples. Anybody else? Yeah.
People at my table.
To you. Yeah. Tell me more about that. Well, either one.
I personally tend to withdraw. I keep my thoughts to myself. I won't talk to you about what's troubling me. And I recognize that as being stressful.
Yeah, yeah. When you kind of close down, you're in your head, you're processing it yourself, perhaps. Yeah, that's a good one.
I guess my stress, I think about this when we're talking about this. Because it's a comment she makes to me and my brain. It's not really my brain, it's everybody else's.
Right. Everybody else is driving. Look at them. Oh my gosh, why are they not turning on the turn signal?
She makes this kind of joke between this. Obviously, there's a license tag on the front or sign on the front or the rear of my truck because people we follow me too close, we're going to pull out the front.
Yes.
And it's really bad when we're camping. You have about 40 feet behind the truck.
Wow.
And people don't slow down because they don't have any reality.
Right, right. And that makes you anxious that they're not keeping their distance.
And I need to go right in front of them. Pull out.
Yeah.
And I run them out.
Right.
What's going on? And it's on her nerves. So then she tries to de-stress.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So
Oh.
speaking out and saying,
She informed this council
it is, I mean, a little bit maybe, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I will make sure to write that down. I'm just kidding. Yeah, and I do agree. I mean, that's a really good awareness of some folks who kind of turn inward and others who become more vocal. I was feeling particularly stressed over the holiday, and my oldest child said, "Mom, did you know that you repeated yourself with that one sentence several times?" That's me, right? I don't want to forget something, or did I remind you of such and such, or oh, did I remember to do such and such? So that's my, again, I become more vocal in that regard. As far as saying things out loud. Anything else? Anyone else have something? Yeah.
Right, we talked about lack of sleep, not being able to sleep. and
Yes.
Waking up with racing thoughts. and-
Yes. Racing thoughts, not being able to sleep. Anxious brain has a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fears, and also, becoming physically sick.
Yes, physical sickness, absolutely. Absolutely. Digestive issues, or just cold symptoms even. Getting a headache, having a sore throat, getting run down. Anxiety can really, really wreak havoc on us. Yeah. Let me switch to the other question, which is, what do you see in others? Maybe it's not something that, I mean, I've already mentioned what my daughter sees in me, but what do you see in others? Maybe that are the same as yourself or maybe different. They can't stop talking. Yep, again, anxious brain, anxious energy. Got a lot to do, got a lot to say. Yeah. I used to laugh and say that when my mom was super stressed, I would wake up in high school and the house would be clean. So she would use her anxious energy to clean. And I'm like, oh, that's really good, Mom. Are you okay? So, yeah.
I do that personally. Lydia calls that my manic cleaning phase.
The manic cleaning, yes.
But I think I noticed irritability. I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of folks who are anxious and also kind of reactivity.
Absolutely.
Things, but
Absolutely. Irritability and reactivity, 100%. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I would say that these people that I was referring to, think he's starting to grow, right? They're stressed.
Yeah, probably. That's a good point. Absolutely. Erratic behavior, perhaps. Absolutely. Well,
You get all these signs.
yes.
Signs.
We will refrain from the signs that people do when they're driving. Yeah. Too funny. Okay, so let's shift to this, and we're going to go to the next slide, which is going to talk about symptoms. But before we do that, I do want to ask, what are things that you do that help alleviate some of these symptoms for yourself? Is there anything that you found helpful? You've already heard me mention a couple of things around acute stressors, but what do you do? Yeah.
I found that,
Yep, exercise, go for a walk, yeah.
I found that using positive self-talk helps, like, things are gonna be okay, or I look at, like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? If whatever I'm stressed about happens, and then I look at what's the best case scenario, and then I think, what's likely to happen?
Yes, that's great. I'm going to try to paraphrase that for those who are listening in. But yeah, it's that notion of positive self-talk. It's that saying of like, hey, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's also the best thing that could happen? And what's the most likely thing that's going to happen? Like, give myself some credit that it might not be the worst case scenario, although it probably won't be the best case scenario too. Where's my reality in between there? And how do I prepare? So that's a big thing with anxiety that I try to help folks with, is just help them say, okay, where is the likelihood going to happen? Like you mentioned, Meredith, and then also, where do I prepare? What else? I heard exercising, yeah.
Amanda, you got to tell me that chocolate has something.
Chocolate is a miracle worker. It actually, I mean, sense of taste is a sense that is helpful. I mean, we talk about that when, we enjoy certain flavors, we enjoy certain textures. You might have a very favorite pillow that you like to snuggle with because it's super soft, or super soft pajamas. That's my thing. Super soft pajamas. I'm like, oh, this is so good. Yeah, so I mean, that's a piece of it. I mean, I don't know how great it is otherwise, but although I don't know, Andrew and I were talking about our chocolate's probably good for heart health, right? Yep, you've heard that. So I don't know, we're gonna make it up. What else?
I remove myself from the stress environment.
Yes. When we have control, remove ourselves from a stressful situation. Absolutely. That is helpful in so many different ways. We can't always do that. Life gives us stressful things that we can't walk away from, but when we can, that's a great option.
Someone in our table mentioned gardening.
Oh, gardening, yes.
I remember hearing about a study they did over in the UK about how like being around green spaces and bird song is actually healing your life.
Yes, yes.
And somebody else also shared about doing something that you know you're good at, so you can just engage without much thought. So like if you have a hobby or something that you enjoy, just doing that for a little bit.
Perfect. Gardening, a hobby, absolutely. Those things that can maybe take you away from the stressful event. Also, again, we're trying to find, going back to brain chemistry, trying to engage in some dopamine enhancers, right? Things that feel good. Chocolate's one of them. Gardening might be another. Scents, if you like, aromatherapy, diffusers, those kinds of things are not going to cure everything, right? But we're just trying to get a break from some of the symptoms that we're experiencing.
Interact with an animal.
Animals, yes, they're wonderful, wonderful, soothing. Well, unless you have a crazy terrier like me, but most of the time they're soothing. Yes, but animals are great for that, especially when they're sweet and loving and cuddly.
And definitely scripture from, I have, first aid kit with scriptures.
Yes, first aid scripture, absolutely. Yep. I have only 2 that I've included in here, but there are so many more. I have pages and pages of them that I've accumulated over the years of things that are just speaking to me. And that is very key. And what when I move into self-care, I'm doing it under the umbrella of spirituality. You'll see that in just a moment. All right, so let's cover what I've written on here, signs and symptoms. You've all named a lot of them, but feelings of fear, anger, sadness, worry, numbness. You have some people who just stop feeling altogether. They just get numb. That's a possibility. Changes in appetite, energy, desires, interests. So if we can connect back to things that we know we are interested in, that's fantastic. Because sometimes we might have changes in that. Difficulty concentrating and making decisions. I mean, that is a key thing I think that is troubling for a lot of people when we are stressed is typically we might be stressed because we have something that we've got to potentially make a decision about, and that can be very, very debilitating and difficult when you've got to make decisions. Difficulty with sleeping, which you've already mentioned, maybe nightmares. I have folks who will have, so there's lots of different insomnias. There's the insomnia of having a difficulty falling asleep, having a difficulty staying asleep, and then an early awakening. So you can have all 3, which is really painful, or you can have one of them that's more difficult than the others. Physical reactions such as headaches, body aches, stomach pains, skin rashes. If you have someone that you know who has eczema, that actually can be exacerbated by psychological stress and stressors. Worsening of chronic health problems. So, if you've got, we talked about not feeling well physically, if you already have an underlying condition, it can potentially make those feel worse. Worsening of mental health problems. So if you are feeling anxious and stressed and you also have a history of depression or any other just health issue that you've had, that might exacerbate it. And also increased use of tobacco, alcohol, and other substances. We typically see that when people are looking for an escape. They want to feel better, perhaps. Nicotine is a stimulant. Sometimes it can kind of give you a feel-good effect. Certainly alcohol is a depressant. It can be a little bit more numbing and help us not think. I don't know if it's really helping, but whatever. And so those kinds of things are what people sometimes gravitate towards just to get space away from those anxious thoughts and feelings and stress. But ultimately, that clearly is not helpful. In the long run, those stressors are still going to be there. You're not coping with it. You're not really doing it. Okay, so my shift now is really going to be under this guise of spirituality and self-care. And the reason why I did it this way is because I wanted you to understand from a spirituality perspective. And when I say spirituality, spiritual, I'm connected to our religious beliefs. That's what I'm referring to. And I apologize that it's a little bit small print, but again, not knowing who's going to pick these slides up, I wanted to be inclusive of that. So learning to cope with stressors in a healthy way will make you and the people you care about and those around you become more resilient. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about today is focusing on you, on the person here in this room. But I recognize that you might be here because you experience that loved ones have stress and anxiety that you are also having to deal with. But I'm going to use my analogy that I use all the time. When you are on an airplane and the cabin loses air pressure and the oxygen bag falls from the ceiling, who are you supposed to put it on first? Yourself, exactly. So this is us putting that oxygen mask on. We're taking care of ourselves so that we're better able to take care of others. Okay, so that is really where I'm coming from around self-care. It does not mean that if we are falling apart ourselves, we can't help others, because certainly that we can't. But this is my bend of where I'm coming from tonight. So here's the thing: if our basic needs are not met, in this room, probably our basic needs are met, but if they're not, that in and of itself is a stressor. If you have food insecurity, if you don't have the ability to have good hygiene, you don't have access to a shower. These kinds of things are stressful in and of themselves. So the reason my basic needs is on here is to just acknowledge that that is important. You must take care of your basic needs, which is why when sleep is an issue from anxiety, that is the first thing that I work on with people. We got to have our basic needs met as best as possible before we can have the stamina and the resiliency to work on these other things. So spirituality has benefits for stress relief and overall mental health. So I'm couching this under self-care with spirituality, right? So the first thing, feeling a sense of purpose. It says, cultivating your spirituality may help uncover what's most meaningful in your life. Meaning, meaning, meaning. If you know what is meaningful to you and you can connect to it, your relationship with God, your relationship with your family, your relationship with your friends, these meaningful things are important to you. By clarifying what's most important, you can focus on the things, focus less on what's unimportant and more on eliminating stress. So someone who said walk away from the stressful event, that is knowing when to engage and when not to engage. Sometimes we don't have a choice, but when we do, try to make the choice for the self-care, right? Also, this sense of purpose also helps us align our values. What is important to me? And when we know what is meaningful and we know what is valuable, then we can discern. I always talk about decision making in anxiety. We can discern how we're going to manage it. We're going to discern what we're going to focus on. I'm hot too. Are you waving yourself too? It's warm here. I thought it was me because I'm nervous, but I'm like, she's saying to herself, it's not just me. All right. So the other piece in this is connecting to the world. So the more you may feel you have a purpose in the world, the less solidarity you may feel. And this can lead to a valuable inner peace during difficult times. Now, this one here, to me, connecting to the world, is huge in mental health, because the stigma of mental health is that folks with mental health concerns and issues don't feel connected to the world. So if you are experiencing things and you feel like I am by myself, I cannot figure out how to get connected because of the potentially if it's stigma or if it's just feeling alone, that is when I encourage you to reach out. And again, by reaching out, I don't mean necessarily in a way that you feel uncomfortable. It can be, there's a whole page at the end of your handy dandy pamphlets here, or your handouts on resources. I mean, it's lengthy, and Andrew mentioned some as well that maybe in his that are not online, and I know that our next two presenters, Meredith and Dana, are both going to give you things too. But you can reach out. If you don't have a person, a place, a thing, you can find someone to reach out to. Connection is huge. Releasing control. Well, you talked a little bit about that notion of control. When you feel part of a greater whole, part of a greater community, you may realize that you aren't responsible for everything that happens in life, and you can share the burden of tough times as well as the joys and of life's blessings with those around you. This, to me, goes back to, with spirituality, is connection to God's plan for us. That it is about that notion that we are not going to be able to control everything that happens in our lives. And as I mentioned before, when we do have control over choices in our lives, we can exert certain kinds of coping mechanisms. But when we don't have choice, when a car hits us, when a hurricane comes, when things happen to us that are not our choice, right? We have to recognize that in all of that, how do we find God's plan for us? How do we rest in that? It is not easy. We are human, and therefore we like to, maybe I should speak for myself, I like to have some bit of control that I can have. But this connection of releasing control and connection to God's plan is huge. Trying to recognize that is important. So when you look at these three, we talk about spirituality, sense of purpose, connection, and releasing control. Which one to you is most important or speaks to you? It doesn't have to be most important. Yeah. Feeling of purpose, sense of purpose, that's, You may have heard of The Purpose-Driven Life, that book, many years ago. It's a really good one if you're looking for something that would connect this. Yeah.
But I work with the individuals I work with around values
Yes.
and things that just deeply held beliefs, and trying to remember, like, these are the things that I stand for, these are the things that I hope for. I think I do that because I find it helpful for me to be reminded, oh, these are the things I believe in, these are the things I strive to be like.
Yes.
And so just, for me, a lot of writing internally.
Right, beliefs and
Beliefs and values and sense of purpose is important.
Absolutely, our values, our beliefs, yeah. And I do think that connecting back to that is super important. It's a little bit, it's not going to necessarily take care of that particular stressor that's in front of you. In other words, there are action items with stressors or things that we can't take care of. But I do think that this is the type of work that we can do even when life isn't giving us a lot of stressors, that we can build on and upon when life does give us these difficult times. All right, we've got a couple more. So expanding your support network. So sharing of can. Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? I think I was gonna say something else. Anyway, sharing can help build relationships. I think that one of the things I'll mention is that we are in a time where we as mental health care professionals are trying to connect others so they don't feel alone, so that they can recognize that there are others who have experienced something like what you have experienced, which is why I think we've had a surge, and I say surge, over the last 10 years of different kinds of support groups that are out there. A lot of people have heard of sort of addiction support groups, whether it's AA or NA, that kind of thing. But we also have ones for families who are experiencing estrangement. We have support groups for grief. We have support groups for all kinds of things because we recognize that our unique personal experience can be connected to somebody else's unique experience. So that to me is huge. And a fellowship of believers, we're in the fellowship hall, right? This is what's really important, is connecting to people that share those same values and meaningful purpose in life so that we can uplift each other as well. And that's why I'm so thankful that we are doing a lot of these talks around mental health, so that we can connect with each other and support each other. Leading a healthier life. So it says here, people who consider themselves spiritual may be better able to cope with stress and they experience health benefits. Now that is actually from a whole host of research. Small tangent, John Kabat-Zinn is a man who has been doing tons of research with mindfulness. And one of the most cool things I think that he researched was mindfulness around cancer patients. And what he was trying to do is recognize that if we can figure out ways to feel hopeful, to be in the moment, to connect to ourselves, to connect to others, that we have a sense of hope that then our health concerns can benefit from. Doesn't necessarily cure us, but it definitely helps us get through those really tough times when we have health issues. And it can create, again, go back to body chemistry and such, it can create a change that is positive for those folks who are experiencing health concerns. So the other piece I have here is self-reflection. So Andrew's already mentioned the notion of prayer and meditation and journaling and such. And I think that that is important, right? It says mindfulness, relaxation techniques. You can Google any of these words and you can find a whole host of things. One of my favorite is there are tons of YouTube videos on these, mindfulness meditations. For those who are having sleep difficulties, there's mindfulness for sleep. There's all kinds of cool stuff that will help you kind of reset and hopefully recharge in some way. Keeping a journal, excuse me, where you can express your feelings and record your progress, seeking out a trusted advisor, a friend, a counselor. You'll notice on the very last slide, I've given you my contact information directly. I am very passionate about connecting people to resources. I served as an employee assistance counselor, which meant at Duke, I saw these employee or their family members for a very limited time. And then my responsibility was helping them get referred into the community for continued care. So this is important to me. You can give my name, my number to anybody you want to, within reason, please. But to anybody you want to, and I will try to help them in any way I can. That is huge for me. I know it is a daunting task to get connected within mental health. So I will try my best to help you in any way I can. But it's important for you, others may have insights that you have not yet discovered. That is what is so cool about talking about these things. Sometimes we have, and I know Andrew touched on this too, we have shame. We have shame in feeling like we're not handling something well. We're not managing something well. Why is this causing me stress? And, Sally over here looks like she is just fine and she, can handle it, right? We do those comparisons, but it is our own journey. And really, you have got to look at what do you need? And therefore, then how can you help others, right? So, again, seeking others, whether it's advisors, ministers, therapists, friends, support groups, whatever, because they may have some insight that could be really helpful to you. Reading inspirational stories and essays. That is so cool. My mom loves her some biographies. That woman will read about anybody in the world. She's like, did you know they overcame blah, blah, blah. It's really inspiring. And everyone has a story. Everyone. So if you can connect to other people's stories in some way, that's helpful too. And then talking to those whose spiritual lives you admire, perhaps. And this sometimes is hard to find because we don't always talk about our testimonies and talk about our stories. But here in this church fellowship, especially Sunday school classes where we have more intimate relationships, that can be really helpful in connecting to someone's story. And asking questions, how did you manage such and such? I mean, again, having a daughter who just went off to college, I was polling everybody who's had a kid go to college. How did you deal with this? Did you cry? Did you, were you like, let's throw a party? Like, how did you manage it, And that's just one stressor that was in my life that I tried to reach out to. If you are, feeling like you need some guidance, I encourage that. And also, much like was already talked about, seeking a place of solitude. Sometimes being with our thoughts can be hard, but it might be necessary to learn what we are saying to ourselves, how we are managing what is going on around us, so that then we can figure out what we need. Maybe we need exercise. Maybe we need to go be out in nature. Maybe we need to just go talk to a friend. Whatever those things are, trying to find ways for you to kind of connect to those things. So when you read through this list, what do you think? Any of these you've tried? Any of these things you found helpful? Any of them you're like, that doesn't work for me? Because that's gonna happen too. That's gonna happen too. Which thing? Hello. I'm gonna be honest, I can't journal very well. I encourage people all the time to journal. I'm a bullet point journaler, and then I'm like, what did I mean by that word? What is that? I don't remember what I was thinking there. So it's not really helpful for me. I'll just be honest.
Journaling is paperwork.
Right. Exactly. For some people, yeah, she's saying journaling is paperwork. I totally get it. And that doesn't work for everybody, right? I mean, but But maybe you connect with reading an inspirational story of someone who's gone through something similar.
I find audiobooks, you know, I don't like having an hour to use one way to work. However, it's a very good way to use your time.
Yeah.
To listen to stories or.
Audiobooks are great for that, yeah, especially when you do have that long commute one way.
Yep.
That's really tough, yeah. Yeah, and I do find that that's something that, you know, if you are someone who likes to walk, you know, it's really easy for me to put on music, but I really have benefited from podcasts, for things to just listen to that are snippets, you know, whatever you can do that's uplifting, yeah. YouTube, yeah. Love me some YouTube. Thanks for the consequences.
I was gonna say alternatively, I think silence is really helpful, but you kind of have to find space for it and ease into it, which can take some time. I think we're so stimulated by all these things that we love. It can be really nice to just be in silence if you can find it somewhere.
Yeah, the transition from being stimulated to silence is very, can be very difficult at times. And I do agree that solitude can be really helpful. I think we can hear ourselves better. I mean, that sounds pretty obvious, but I don't know that it is. And I think that, you know, oftentimes I will write down a phrase of self-talk that I've got going on in my head so that I can capture it and be like, oh, I don't think I heard that until I was quiet. So that's huge.
Amanda, I think
Yeah.
one of the things is to have a talk partner
Yes.
and not family.
Right. A talk partner that's not family. Absolutely.
But you know, because of, you know, when you speak something out, you understand more, or you might get insight that you wouldn't otherwise.
Yes, and it's so funny because as a therapist, I say to people, did you just hear what you said? did you hear the words that you just said yourself? Like, I didn't have to say a thing, you just said, you know, that's really powerful, I think. Absolutely.
And music.
Music.
Yeah,
Yes.
something that I put on and it takes my years away. you know.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes we connect with music because it does have a message of something that is meaningful, and sometimes it just frees us. You know, we don't have to think. We just can kind of get lost in the what I call bubblegum lyrics, right? You know, like, oh, this sounds good, kind of thing. Yeah, fantastic. And again, it goes back to senses. Something we hear that isn't good, something that we taste that's good, something we feel is good. All of those things are helpful in grounding us as well. So my two pieces of scripture, and again, I had a good billion of them, but these two are two that I've had for a long while. John 41:13, for I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. That to me goes back to sort of God's plan, do not fear. I mean, the whole reason I'm doing this presentation is not only that I'm a therapist, but I am an anxious person. So this is huge for me. And my Philippians 4:6, which love. Do not be anxious. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Those two are just really powerful for me as a person and also as a therapist. And I always love it when I can bring spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs into the room with me with folks, because I can certainly use that as another way of helping shore people up. All right, so I've spent a lot of time talking about anxiety, stress, trauma, brain stuff, just setting the stage for you to know that like stuff happens and you get affected by it. And so therefore, right? Therefore, here's how you can do some things that you can, under spirituality and self-care, take care of yourself so that then you can figure out how to be helpful to others. These things can certainly be encouraged to others. But one of the biggest things, talk partner, is being heard. So active listening. Key to active listening is, it's going to sound strange, not putting your words out there, but putting the other person's words out there. What did you hear the person say? Active listening is rephrasing what you are hearing. So it's very different than a conversation. It is intentional, and it is repeating back to someone what you heard them say. And again, we've already mentioned how powerful that can be. Compassion. You may not have experienced what this person has experienced, but if you can show them compassion and care, and that what they are going through is something that you can care about them, you care for them through it, I think that's huge. I've already mentioned stigma, so destigmatizing. If someone comes to you with that shame, with that embarrassment, of like, I do not know why I cannot get myself together, right? I am, I'm oversleeping, I can't concentrate at work, my boss has had to tell me, like, where's this, project that you were supposed to turn into me, whatever, right? It normalize it as best that you can. It is a human experience, both to have anxiety. Obviously, the disorders are very disruptive in day-to-day functioning, but it's normative to struggle. We are going to struggle. I remind myself all the time, if Jesus struggled, why would I not? So if he had to go through everything that he went through, I am most certainly going to have my own empathy. So to me, empathy is being able to imagine yourself in that person's shoes. You do not have to have had the experience to be empathetic. But if you can imagine yourself, and you don't even have to understand it, but if someone describes it to you and you can put yourself there, that is the empathy that we're talking about. And my biggest thing, as I mentioned before, is hope, right? I expect recovery. I expect people will get better. So the hope is that we have to just put one foot in front of the other and it will change. That I can guarantee you life is going to give you change, right? That's pretty much death, taxes, and change. But anyway, those are things that are going to happen. But hope, I always offer hope. And not, in my opinion, flat hope, but highest hope that we are going to be able to keep going. So as I mentioned, we've got some handy resources that are at the bottom or at the end there. I did not, yeah, you got it on the left. Oh, she's got them in there. Sorry, did you guys not have them there? Oh, they were separate, you're right. I apologize. Because they were so big, they wouldn't fit on the slide, so I just put them in a Word document. So they're coming around. And for those of you who are on Facebook Live, that's me. Local support referrals consultation, that is me. And I'm not going to charge you. This is my passion. This is what I want for you. I want you to have connection. I want you to be connected with someone in the community, someone in the medical field, someone in the psychology field, whatever you need. I really offer that as a way to just say, how can I help? I don't know how to navigate every system, but those that I don't know how to navigate, I'm willing to kind of figure it out myself. I will tell you that in 15 years of doing private practice and having hundreds and hundreds of clients, I am humbled. I'm humbled by my experiences. I am humbled by what people entrust to me. And I am humbled by this church for instilling their care in me to be able to care for others. So it's been a pleasure to be here with you guys. Do you guys have any questions? Any things that you'd like to come back to? We have a whole 4 minutes. Look at that. Look at me. Finished on time. Any thoughts? No? You're welcome to come up here and talk to me after the fact too, if you have any specifics or anything. And I just thank you so much for coming, and hopefully it's been informative and helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's next week? Is it Dana? Oh, yeah, sorry.
We're doing loss and grief next week with Dana Sumner. She's awesome. So come on back. I'm plugging her. No, honestly, that's going to be a big one too. I think that obviously with our pandemic, but also just in general. So hopefully you'll come back 6:30, 7:30 next Wednesday as well.
Let's close with prayer. Dear God, I thank you for all that was presented tonight. May it be received well and understanding, and know that we are here as a community together. We love you, Lord, and we seek you in all that we do. Be with us now and those who hurt with us and around us and ourselves. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you. Thanks.